Aren't crossovers the coolest thing? How sick is it seeing your favourite things come together to create something even better than they were on their own? It's so groovy, baby! I myself am a crossover. I'm a cross of my mother's hair and very small shoe size, and my father's eyebrows and sexual organs. Crossovers happen a lot in the world of games. You've got things like Super Smash Bros. And Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, and I can't think of any other big ones, but there are others. And among those others are Crash and Spyro Fusion, also known as Crash Purple, Ripto's Rampage, and Spyro Orange, the Cortex Conspiracy. When I first discovered the existence of these games, I was unbelievably stiff at the very concept of a Crash and Spyro crossover. That's like any PlayStation kid's ultimate dream. Just imagining what something like that could be like filled us PS1 kids with wonder and excitement. But the reality of it was not so groovy, baby. Firstly, this pair of games was exclusive to the GBA. No PlayStation kid had a Game Boy Advance. That was an unwritten rule for kids who played video games. No childhood gamer had both a PS1 and GBA. It just didn't happen. And if you tell me that you did, you're lying. You're absolutely lying. I don't believe you. Because it was on the GBA, for a lot of us, these games were out of reach. And honestly, I wish it stayed that way. Because through the magic of I managed to experience these games firsthand, and fuck me. I don't know how well known these games are in the broader gaming community, but Crash Purple and Spyro Orange are notorious for being utter trash and a complete waste of potential. I don't know if these games were the result of meddling by higher up executives or if the development team was just zonked out of their gourd, but whatever happened resulted in an absolute car crash. These games are just awful, and I'm going to tell you why, starting with Crash Purple, Ripto's Rampage. Previously on GBA Crash games, we had Crash Bandicoot XS and Crash Bandicoot 2 Entranced. Now these were pretty decent games. They weren't anything overly special, but they were fun and enjoyable GBA adaptations of the classic Crash formula. And I like them. But all of their positive attributes and best qualities were not carried over to Crash Purple, because improving the good stuff and fixing the bad stuff for a new installment is a ridiculous thing to do, isn't it? Crash Purple is a completely different game. It still has some platforming in the form of the hub world, and that was, well, mediocre, but it was bearable. XS and Entranced probably could have benefited from something like this. But would you believe that it's pretty much the best part of the game? Because the rest of this shit heap is just a collection of mini-games. If you know me, you know I hate it when games get distracted with bullshit like vehicles and alternate gameplay styles. Well, guess what? In Crash Purple, that's the entire game. And to that, I say, fuck you.
Fuck you!
The first level was called Grin and Bear It, which coincidentally was the strategy I adopted for surviving this bastard game. This minigame was actually alright in concept, and it's the sort of thing I can picture being in a proper GBA Crash game, but the execution was poor. It was a pretty flat beginning to this game's actual gameplay. It lasted about a minute, and consisted of only pressing A every few seconds. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, bloody hell, this is a terrible opening level. And you're right, but I'm not kidding when I say that that minigame is the best level in this whole thing. It just gets worse. Level 2 is called Sheep Stampede. This level involves Crash using his bazooka to defend himself from a Plants vs. Zombies style invasion of sheep for about a minute. So that's cool. At the very least, it's much better than Level 3, which is a very slow and boring tank mission, and Level 4, which is, well, this. And yet somehow, it gets even worse, because Level 5 is shocking. It's a minigame where you need to traverse down a river, avoiding hazards and obstacles, which is fine in concept, but the reality is terrible. It's very tough to control because the movement is slippery, and even more sensitive than I was during my first time. The slightest tap sends you flying off, so you really just have to hold a direction and hope that you go the right way. It's just appalling. I don't really understand how this is fun for anyone. What's fun about this? It's not hard, it's not satisfying, it's not anything. After beating all 5 levels in the hub world and collecting their crystals, you can access a boss fight. This is the big crossover moment. This is where Crash and Spyro finally meet. All that bullshit has been leading to this. Brace yourself, this is why we are here. What the hell was that? That's how they decided to bring the Bandicoot and Dragon of platforming fame together? By standing across a chasm throwing Molotov cocktails at each other? By the way, the only extent that this game is actually a crossover is because Spyro characters appear in it. You can't play as them, you can only play as Crash. There is just the presence of Spyro characters. I would go into detail about the story, but even the game doesn't do that. It's just Cortex and Ripto teaming up to take over the world by tricking Crash and Spyro into fighting each other. Immediately, I wasn't interested in what was going on because the whole point of the crossover had already been ignored. You do all this 3 more times in different hub worlds with some new minigames, but mainly just repeated ones, as well as some of the worst boss fights you'll ever see. I can barely even bring myself to believe that Nina Cortex is in this game. The Nina I know would never be a part of something as poor as this. There is some more to do. There are crate challenges, which are pretty much the only things in this game that bears any resemblance to Crash Bandicoot, and you also have exciting gameplay moments like this. And look! Trading cards! Wow! Isn't this game so cool? No, it isn't. To whoever decided to make this game about bullshit minigames instead of Crash Bandicoot and Spyro the Dragon, I say, fuck you.
Fuck you.
I just don't get it. How could this game end up being so bad? Like, literally everything about it is bad. Every minigame is either boring or annoying, or it's just nothing. I mean, who came up with the Crunch weightlifting game and thought, yeah, that's some good shit right there, and then thought it should be put in the game 4 times? 4 times! The crate challenges are actually alright and are probably the best part of the game, but they're never any longer than 20 seconds. Most of this game is just bullshit, which is nuts to me. They already had 2 platforming-focused GBA Crash games that they could have pulled from. They could have made this game another platformer, but this time included Spyro as an extra playable character. And for Spyro Orange, which I'll get to, could have been another Spyro platformer but with Crash as a playable character. That's such an obvious idea that I'm completely dumbstruck that they didn't go down that path, and instead decided to make a worse Crash Bash with Spyro characters in it. Even though I was teetering on the edge of having a breakdown, I continued to grin and bear it. I at least wanted to be able to say that I reached the end of it and gave it a good go. And I nearly managed it until I was told that I could only access the end of the game if I collected all of the gems. It really is just like Crash Bash. You see, there are 2 collectibles in this game, 3 if you count trading cards, but who gives a shit about that? Crystals are earned by beating the minigame plain and simple, but each minigame has a number of crates scattered about, and as is tradition for this series, breaking them all rewards you with a gem. If I wanted to beat the game, I would need to go back and play every single one of those fuck-ass minigames a second time, this time breaking all the crates. And there was no way in hell I was gonna do that. To whoever decided to lock the end of this shitty game behind that requirement, I say, fuck you.
Fuck you.
In an attempt to circumvent this whole thing, I went online to look for some cheat codes. I thought maybe there'd be a way to access the end of the game without going through what would legally and medically be described as self-harm. There was no cheat for earning all gems, but there was a cheat that unlocked Spyro Party USA, which is this. This is the level we're at here with this game. Speaking of the USA, it's at times like this where I remember a quote from Kamala Harris, which also happens to be the only thing I know about Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris once said, "You think you just fell out of a coconut tree?" You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you. When it comes to this game, I should be thinking about the context. This game clearly wasn't made for people who have thoughts. This game was made for kids with no sense of a product's quality who just wanted to see Crash and Spyro in the same game. and for them, this game delivers. But once that kid grows up, they're gonna wish they fell out of a coconut tree so they could forget the pain of what they endured when they revisit this game in their adulthood. Crash Purple, Ripto's Rampage, fails at every turn. Not even the game's decent presentation can conceal the true ugliness on display here. This game is just the same few bullshit minigames on rotation with barely a sliver of fun to be had. Its only redeeming quality is a front row seat to crunch flexing, which I've promptly stored in the wank bank for later use. To Crash Purple, I say, fuck you.
Fuck you.
Now to Spyro Orange the Cortex Conspiracy. Going into Spyro Orange, morale was at an all-time low. I wasn't sure I was ready to face the horrors that lurked within those 16 megabytes, but I just had to grin and bear it. Spyro Orange the Cortex Conspiracy, in terms of narrative and setting, is exactly the same as Crash Purple, only from Spyro's perspective. And to be completely honest, I'm well past caring about that at this point. I haven't even started playing, and I already want this to end. But I just sucked it up and got on with it. The first level of Spyro Orange is this. Spyro, everyone! This is what Spyro is all about, isn't it? Immediately I could tell that this game was just going to be more of the same shit. Well, not quite, because it turns out that Spyro Orange is actually full of worse shit. Level 2 is some on-rails tank shooter where you just move and spam the shoot button. No thoughts, just tanks. What is the Spyro series' obsession with tanks? Level 3 is this Molotov cocktail game from Crash Purple. Remember that? Remember how fun and interesting that was? Well, that's a regularly occurring level in this game. Fucking awesome. Level 4 is where I genuinely started to lose my mind. Take a look at this level. Does this look familiar to you at all? Does this look like some kind of top-down on-rails shooter that we've already seen in this game? No? Well, it should, because this is the same thing as the tank minigame. It's just been rotated 90 degrees. Who do they think they're fooling? Do they think I'm stupid? Do they think I'm a moron? Do they think my IQ is lower than the number of degrees they rotated the gameplay to trick me into thinking it was something fresh and exciting? It's the same thing! It's the same thing! In what situation is rotating something 90 degrees an improvement? The latest installment of our game series is a great improvement over our last. In the previous game we focused on this sort of gameplay, but this time we're going all out, and I'd like to present to you this. Wow, that's awesome! So innovative. How did they come up with it? Wow, these pancakes look absolutely delicious. I can't imagine the chef could make anything better than this. Ah, you think I cannot make a better dish? Then prepare yourself for a dish so great your eyes will pop out of your forehead. Voila! Bon appetit! Oh my god, it's perfect! You never listen to me, Jeremy. You always do something to make me feel like shit, and then every time you walk in with some flowers thinking it'll make everything better. Well, not this time, Jeremy. Not this time. Babe, I know you're upset, and I know I do the same thing every time. But not this time. This time, I'm going to do this. Oh my god. Jeremy, you do love me. Would you grant me the honor of birthing your children? To whoever tried to pass off recycled minigames as new by rotating them 90 degrees, I say, fuck you.
Fuck you.
Do you know what the reward for beating levels in this game is? In Crash Purple, you got crystals. In Spyro Orange, you don't get gems or dragon eggs or orbs or talismans. You get this. It was infuriating. It was like it was mocking me. Look at Spyro, cross-eyed and demonic, telling me that I did it, as if I achieved something of value. And maybe I would have, if I was playing an actual game. Spyro Orange is just Crash Purple again, but only with worse minigames. And if they're not worse, it's because they're carbon copies of minigames that were in Crash Purple. Crash Purple was bad enough, trudging through an onslaught of boring, tedious minigames. Spyro Orange is even worse, with even more boring and more tedious minigames. I didn't play this game all the way to the end either, because the requirement to beat the game was even worse than in Crash Purple. Crash Purple required all of the gems, but Spyro Orange requires you to beat each minigame a minimum of 3 times to unlock the end of the game. Fuck that. This game has all the same problems as Crash Purple did, except it's just worse. The hub worlds are even worse. That was the one thing they did an okay job of in Crash Purple. Everything else is just abysmal, even more so than Crash Purple. And look at this! Open the gate. Did the developers really think that's what people wanted from this game? What were they thinking? Did they really put together all these minigames thinking that people would like them? They're so painfully unremarkable and unfun. The bosses are god-awful as well. The presentation is decent enough, but it's not enough to distract me from what these games really are. Trash. I think what's killing me here is that I'm thinking about the potential that was wasted. A Crash and Spyro crossover could have made for an amazing platformer, combining Crash's and Spyro's respective gameplay styles together into one brilliant gameplay adventure. But instead, they made some bullshit party game with a focus on trading cards. This could have been something special, but instead, it was a travesty. To whoever was responsible for these abominations, I say, fuck you.
Fuck you!
I just don't get it, man. I don't get it. Why did I play this? What was I expecting to happen? I should have stopped at Crash Purple because that game was terrible. Did I think that Spyro Orange would redeem it somehow? It's even worse. Do these games have anything decent to offer? You know what? I think I've had enough. I can't handle thinking about these games anymore. I'm done.